Revenge with Karen.
You're asking for what now? That's what he said, through a laugh so nasal it could have sanded drywall. The CFO, Bryce Telford, leaned back in his ergonomic throne like he was auditioning for a commercial about gout medication, fingers steepled like every smug finance bro who thinks their sarcasm counts as leadership. Victoria sat perfectly still, blazer pressed, a single paperclip between her fingers to keep from grinding her molars into chalk. Years of rebuilding that funds pipeline from the ashes of 2 VP flameouts. And this was the payoff, a man with too much gel in his part line telling her to try elsewhere. Let me rewind a second. Victoria hadn't asked for a throne, a parade, or even the corner office. She'd asked for a 6% bump to the growth projections. Not for her bonus, not for vanity, but to match what her own models had been showing for 6 straight quarters. Clean, sustainable lift. Yeah, she mentioned a minor equity kicker. Nothing absurd. Less than what they gave Tyler the intern for surviving his second week. But Bryce blinked twice like she'd just asked for his left kidney in a mason jar. Try elsewhere if you want that, he chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks like the punchline was her entire career. Folks, before we go any deeper, if you've ever sat across from someone who made you question your sanity with a smirk and a spreadsheet, me a quick favor, like this story and smash that follow button. Seriously, 95% of you listen without subscribing, and if even half of you did, my team might finally stop threatening to replace me with ChatGPT running on a Roomba. It means the world, and it keeps stories like this coming. Back to Bryce. Victoria didn't flinch. She nodded, packed her notes, and left the room with the same grace she'd walked in with. But that walk back to her desk was the longest 10 seconds in a 3-year stretch of grit. As she passed the glass-walled war rooms and open-floor seating filled with muted slackers pretending to work, the whispers had already begun. She was too aggressive, trying to play VP without the title, making waves when the ship finally stopped sinking. Never mind the fact she was the one who plugged the holes. She'd been the one hauling buckets, while the last 2 execs sipped martinis on their way out the door. Later that day in the leadership sink, her name was skipped entirely. Her slide deck, polished and ready, was minimized before she even got to speak. The head of biz dev shared her numbers like they were his. Bryce just nodded along, smug little chortle every time someone echoed the word alignment. It was like being at her own funeral, watching junior staff toss dirt on her contributions with rehearsed ignorance. She could have spoken up. She could have interrupted. She'd already done that, over and over. And if they weren't listening by now, they weren't going to start because she raised her voice. So she didn't rage. She didn't cry. She just sat there, sipping flat LaCroix, cataloging every polite betrayal on a mental spreadsheet that would never make it to the next sink. That night, Victoria didn't go home and journal about imposter syndrome or call her mom for a pep talk. She cracked a bottle of Pinot, opened her laptop, stared at her network list. Old mentors, former clients, ghosts of deals past. She hovered over one name in particular, Marcus Levinson. Marcus wasn't just anyone. He'd been her first real boss, the kind who didn't just teach you the ropes, but handed you the knife when you needed to cut one. Now he was partner at one of their firm's top rivals, and from what she'd last heard, they were searching for a new director of strategic portfolios. Bigger remit, better structure, actual teeth in decision-making. She didn't know if she was going to make the call yet, but her thumb hovered over that green button like it held more than just career potential, like it held a lit match. And somewhere deep beneath the professional poise and muted frustration, something cracked, not broken, but opened. A small, dangerous shift in thinking. Because when someone tells you to try elsewhere, what happens when you do? It started with the looks, not the direct kind, but the ones you catch in your periphery, quick glances that freeze when you turn your head. The slow shift in hallway greetings that morph from "Hey Victoria" to a flat morning. The Slack replies got slower, shorter. One-word answers from people who used to DM her after hours asking if she could take a quick peek at their models. Now, radio silence unless she was looped in by force. The walls weren't glass anymore. They were fogged. She wasn't stupid. Seen this play before, hell, she'd coached interns through it. The moment a woman asks for her worth in a room run by fragile men, the floor shifts like a funhouse. Suddenly, you're too confident, too demanding, not a team player. Meanwhile, Bryce's little favorite, Lindsay from marketing, was still getting applauded for suggesting they put emojis in investor updates like that was a revolutionary concept. The worst part? It wasn't even overt. No one said, being punished, they just stopped seeing her. First, it was the finance stand-ups moved to a smaller invite list. Then the ops review she'd led for 8 straight quarters, handed off to Ben, the guy who once emailed a budget template as a JPEG. Her deck was skipped entirely in the leadership sync. They went from Q2 targets straight to IT infrastructure. No pause, no acknowledgement, just a quiet, surgical erasure, like she was never there. After the meeting, she sat in the break room for 10 minutes, staring into a microwave burrito that had gone cold. Bryce walked in, nodding at her like they'd just had coffee. "Good sync, right?" he said, already half scrolling through his phone. She just blinked at him. The audacity was blinding. She went back to her desk and opened up the shared project dashboard. Her name had been replaced in 2 ownership columns. Tasks reassigned. Credit rebranded. No Slack pings. No courtesy emails. Just quietly siphoned off like office oxygen. The whispers got louder. She passed 2 analysts in the hallway, kids who used to shadow her, and caught the tail end of a sentence. Overreached, I mean, what did she expect? The other one, a smirking finance bro who once begged her to review his pitch deck, muttered something about CFO's golden girl, followed by a laugh. Victoria didn't snap. He didn't storm into Bryce's office or type out some scathing manifesto on company culture. She just smiled, dead calm, and walked back to her desk. She had something better than outrage. Clarity. This wasn't about fairness anymore. It wasn't about respect. It wasn't even about ego. Bryce had made one fatal assumption, that she needed him, that she'd keep orbiting his firm because of inertia or loyalty or fear of starting over. Inertia only works if you don't see the exit, and she'd already cracked the door open. That night, she made the call. Marcus picked up on the second ring, voice as casual as ever. "Vicky V, tell me this is a social call." "It's exploratory," she said, her tone cool but pointed. "You still looking for a portfolio director?" There was a pause on the line, just long enough to confirm he already knew what was happening at her firm. "Funny you ask," Marcus replied, voice brightening, the seat still warm. "We've got $250M coming in across 3 verticals, and I need someone who doesn't flinch when the market coughs." She didn't flinch. "I don't flinch." He laughed, then turned serious. "You want to talk? I want to see your numbers, and your culture doc. I've had enough of smoke and mirrors." He promised to send both by morning. She hung up and stared at her monitor, same dashboard where her name had once stood like scaffolding. Now stripped, sanitized. A ghost in her own legacy. But ghosts have one advantage over the living. They can move through walls. It was almost 8 p.m. on a Thursday when she made the call, long after the Slack pings died, after the last finance bro left to grab drinks with the guys, which always translated to overpriced IPAs, and pretending none of them had unresolved mother issues. Victoria had just rinsed the scent of passive aggression off her with a scalding shower, and changed into her usual post-corporate uniform, leggings, an oversized Ohio State sweatshirt, and a hair tie that had long since given up. She poured a glass of wine, sat on the edge of her bed like it was a balance beam, and thumbed through her contacts. Marcus Levinson. Her thumb hovered. Marcus had been her boss 10 years ago, back when portfolio review still happened in fluorescent-lit conference rooms with whiteboards that bled ghost graphs. He was blunt, brilliant, allergic to bullshit, and had always said she was the only analyst he ever trusted to fix a model and a mess in one go. They hadn't spoken in a while, just the occasional like on LinkedIn or birthday text that landed 3 days late. She didn't overthink it. She just tapped call. It rang once. Then twice. A click. "Victoria Vale," he said, with the half-suspicious warmth of a man answering a call he didn't expect but was intrigued by. "Tell me this is a social call." She exhaled. "Exploratory." A pause, then laughter. "Jesus, I haven't heard that tone from you since we pulled the Griffin account out of a fire." "I'm not asking for a job," she said quickly. "Not yet," Marcus grunted. "Didn't think you were. When the best striker on the field starts looking at the bleachers, it's not for popcorn." She smiled despite herself. "I'm just assessing terrain. You at Apex still, technically. Then you've already answered your own question." There was a pause, then the sound of him clicking a pen. "We just posted for Director of Strategic Portfolios. Full autonomy. $250M under management. Real seat at the investment committee." Her heart didn't leap. It blinked, slow and suspicious. "You already fill it." "Nope. We want someone with teeth." "I want someone with teeth." She leaned forward. "What's the catch?" Marcus chuckled again. "No catch. But full disclosure, you'll recognize a few investor names on the cap table. Cross-pollination with Apex's LPs. Not many, but a few. They've been restless. Victoria's wine glass hovered midair. Same investors, same quarterly calls, same eyes on the projections. And if she moved, they'd see her there, on the other side. That flicker of hesitation, that old voice that whispered, "Don't make waves," got drowned in numbers. Models, the kind of logic that makes a spreadsheet blush. "Send me your culture doc," she said, "and the fund structure. I want to see how you treat your people." Marcus didn't skip a beat. "Already did. Check your inbox." She opened her laptop with one hand, heart drumming just a little faster than the tap of her keys. The PDF was there. 10 pages. Concise, no fluff. Kind of policy design that screams, "We know what we're doing, and we're not afraid of transparency." And in the corner of the last page, one line sealed the deal. "Strategic roles are treated as partners, not costs." That was it. The spark. Victoria sat back and stared at the screen, thinking of how they'd skipped her slides like she was a weather report during a parade, of how Bryce had looked at her request like a personal attack instead of a forecast, and of how, with one shift, one choice, she could do more than walk away. She could reappear somewhere they'd never expect her. She closed the laptop, reached for her phone, and texted Marcus 4 words, "Let's keep talking." Soon, the due diligence didn't start with spreadsheets. It started with the silence between them. The kind of silence you only get between people who don't need to impress each other because they already speak fluent numbers. Victoria and Marcus spent the first few days passing back and forth what he called the bones: org charts, fund structure, past exits, current LP makeup. Then came the models, some brilliant, some brittle, but all honest. She tore through them with the precision of a woman who'd had to fix a waterfall projection during a red-eye to Phoenix, while a senior VP drooled on the window beside her. And each time she poked a hole or asked a question, Marcus didn't flinch. He looped in his ops lead, his legal counsel, even their head of compliance. No defensiveness, no stalling, just transparency, gritty, unvarnished, and real. One call in particular stood out. She flagged a weird clause in an equity schedule, standard vesting language, but with a sunset clause that looked fishy. Marcus didn't get cagey. He laughed, caught it faster than the guy who drafted it. "You just passed the trust test." At Apex, that same question would have gotten her 3 side eyes, a closed-door meeting, and a request to rephrase your concerns more collaboratively. Here, it got her respect. By week 2, she wasn't skeptical. She was surgical, digging into their deal histories, meeting team leads, even reviewing exit memos. They gave her a blank term sheet and said, "Write what you need." And she did. Meanwhile, back at Apex, she was looped into a project titled Q3 Budget Recalibration. Translation: Bryce's pet analyst, Lindsay from marketing, had butchered the budget Victoria already finished 3 weeks ago, mislabeling allocations, misplacing decimal points, and somehow spending $14,000 on a software trial that hadn't even launched. Victoria didn't scream. She didn't snark. She opened the sheet, fixed it in 47 minutes flat, and emailed it back with the subject line, "As requested." Again. Bryce replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Not thanks, not got it. Just the same digital thumb he'd sent when someone posted a dog in a Halloween costume in the company Slack. That night, Victoria stared at her ceiling for a full hour, wine untouched, laptop glowing like a loaded gun beside her. She kept thinking about that sentence from Marcus's culture doc. "We treat strategic hires like partners, not payroll." It wasn't poetry. It was policy. So she opened the term sheet, read every line twice, and once more out loud. Base comp, solid. Bonus, fair, carry, real, no diluted promises, no vanity titles. And on page 5, guaranteed seat at the investment committee starting Q2. 2 words sealed it, effective immediately. But she didn't sign it then. She waited until the calendar pinged. Quarterly LP call, scheduled in 16 days. She replied to Marcus with a revised start date, 2 days before the call. He answered in 5 seconds. "Perfect, welcome aboard." No fireworks, no confetti, just precision. She printed the offer, signed it in pen, and locked it in the same drawer where she once kept her emergency resume. That drawer, for the first time in 3 years, felt lighter. At work the next day, Bryce stopped her outside the elevator. "Hey, Vic," he said like they were high school pals. "Mind helping Lindsay again? She's just not getting the variance calcs." Victoria smiled. "Sure," she said, and helped. Every formula she wrote, every forecast she cleaned, she did it knowing she'd be gone in 12 days. Knowing Lindsay would crash the moment her training wheels rolled away. Knowing the LPs, the very ones Bryce loved to schmooze, would soon be seeing her face on another screen, under another banner. And knowing, deep in her bones, that she wasn't just leaving. She was about to arrive. If you've never resigned in complete silence, I highly recommend it. It's better than therapy, better than revenge. It's control, pure and quiet. That was Victoria's headspace in the days after she signed the offer. No dramatic speeches, no flare of temper, no deleted LinkedIn connections. Just clean, surgical movement through the dying organs of a company that no longer deserved her blood. The first thing she did, request PTO to recharge before Q3 ramps up. Bryce approved it within 5 minutes. "Glad you're taking time to regulate," he wrote. She was a malfunctioning thermostat. Victoria didn't respond. Instead, she used those hours to finalize every single pending project with obsessive precision, budgets, roll-up models, retention forecasts, risk mitigation notes, and her personal favorite, the Investment Committee Handbook rewrite. A document Bryce had stalled for months because, in his words, most of the LPs never read past the pie charts. That comment had stuck with her. Which is why page 3 of the new handbook, buried right beneath the standard fund goals, was a detailed methodology section built around her portfolio strategy. Risk-aligned capital deployment, backed by 12 months of case studies and forward metrics. It read neutral, apolitical, but anyone who knew the numbers would see what it was, her fingerprint. She submitted it on Friday at 4:59 p.m. No one noticed. Meanwhile, her calendar was a performance in misdirection. She kept meetings on schedule, replied to every email, brought coffee to morning sinks, even let Lindsay from marketing drone on about Q3 visioning exercises without blinking. They all thought she was leveling out, that the storm had passed. One of the junior analysts even leaned in after a meeting and whispered, "Glad you're back to your old self." She almost laughed, but she didn't. Silence had a weight now, and she was learning to carry it like gold. New fund honored their end of the deal. No leaks, no LinkedIn update, no welcome post with a staged handshake photo, just quiet onboarding via secure portal. She got access to the models, the Slack channels, the team bios. She met with HR, real HR, not the half-asleep Apex version who once told her maybe just avoid being in the same room as Bryce when he's drinking. She signed confidentiality terms, compliance disclosures, received her badge overnighted to her apartment. She didn't wear it. She didn't need to, not yet. On her last Friday, she walked through the Apex office with a smile so subtle it bordered on saintly. No one suspected. Not Bryce, not Lindsay, not the COO who once told her you've got teeth, but you bite too early. She attended the board packet review, nodded at every slide, and handed over her final input in a sealed folder. Inside that folder, 3-page projection update. Crisp, accurate, and most importantly, timed to trigger LP questions the moment her name appeared again, under a different logo on the upcoming call. There was a single line she knew would detonate later. Assumes continuation of Vail framework for portfolio tiering, see Appendix D. Appendix D didn't exist at Apex, but it would exist at her new fund. Ready to be referenced, unpacked, and expanded, just in time for the LPs to realize where the intelligence had migrated. The last hour of her last day, she stayed late, not out of nostalgia, out of completion. She logged out of her Apex portal, wiped her desk with a Clorox sheet, and left a single sticky note on the monitor, forecast delivered. See you on the call. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. Victoria walked out at 7:42 p.m. No send-off, no cake, just the sound of the cleaning crew wheeling trash bins down the hallway and the elevator doors swallowing her whole. Somewhere above her, the board packet was being uploaded. Somewhere across town, Marcus was prepping the LP decks. And somewhere in between, Victoria Vale no longer worked for Apex, but her shadow still did. It happened faster than anyone expected, and exactly how Victoria planned. The leak wasn't a betrayal, it was choreography. Just a ripple, not a splash. A junior analyst over at the rival fund, Alpine Capital, mentioned her name during an LP prep call. Innocently, casually, like it was already public knowledge. Victoria Vale will be presenting the updated portfolio segmentation. She's bringing the Vail framework with her, so we're folding that into the Q3 strategy, he said, flipping slides like he hadn't just dropped a match in a room full of gas. The LP on the line, Apex's largest limited partner. And just like that, the whisper war began. Victoria was mid-pour on her second coffee when her phone buzzed. Not Slack, not email, her personal cell. COO Bryant H. She let it ring once, twice. Answered with the kind of crisp calm usually reserved for ER doctors and chess grandmasters. Victoria speaking. His voice came fast, flat, and tight. Did you talk to Alpine Partners? She sipped her coffee. Yes. Pause like dead air. When? Few weeks ago. You didn't think till you told me to try elsewhere, she said, tone smooth as glass, dead silence. Then a heavy exhale. Is this official? It's real and effective. He didn't ask what role. He didn't ask the terms. He just groaned, the kind of noise men make when the storm cloud they ignored starts rattling the windows. Bryce is going to lose it. I'm sure he will, she replied, still sipping. That's between Bryce and the board now. And with that, she ended the call. 10 minutes later, Bryce's office door slammed hard enough for the whole floor to hear. An intern claimed he heard a mug shatter. Another swore Bryce said something about stabbing in the back, but Victoria doubted he'd use a cliché that vivid. He was more of a she's always been difficult kind of guy. That afternoon, an emergency meeting pinged on every partner calendar. Subject, Victoria Vale /Q3 positioning /urgent. Inside that meeting, the board chair didn't mince words. We have confirmation. She's presenting on the next LP call for Alpine Capital. One of the finance leads looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. Are we sure it's her? Maybe someone else with the same, it's her, the chair cut in. Her name's in their prep deck. Her framework is referenced. And our shared LPs are already asking questions. Bryce tried to pivot. Should issue a clarifying statement. Downplay her involvement. Emphasize continuity here. The chair narrowed his eyes. Prepare a statement? You mean reactively? I will need something better than continuity, Bryce, the chair snapped. She wrote your Q3 methodology. She was part of a team, she was the team. Bryce's mouth opened, then closed, then stayed that way. Back in her apartment, Victoria lit a candle she'd been saving, some overpriced fig and vetiver thing from a boutique she hated herself for loving, and sat down at her new desk. A fresh stack of onboarding paperwork sat to her left, her new badge resting on top. The name printed in clean Helvetica. Victoria Vale Director, Strategic Portfolios Alpine Capital Partners. She didn't grin. She didn't gloat. But she did open her laptop, connect to Alpine's network, and pull up the Q3 investor deck. Slide 14 was hers. Slide 18 featured her framework. Slide 23 bore her initials. And on slide 25, just above the closing remarks, it read, presented by Victoria Vale somewhere across the city. Bryce was probably revising his statement. Probably throwing buzzwords at his comms team like duct tape on a sinking yacht. She hoped he made it to the call on time. Because when he did, he'd see her name again. Only this time, be in the margins. It'd be front and center. The quarterly LP call began like every other, a chorus of dings, a few coughs, the rustle of paperwork, and overcompensated confidence. Apex went first, of course, always did. They still had the bigger name, the longer history, the slightly louder voice in the room. But the weight, that was shifting. Slowly. Like a fault line no one wanted to admit was there. Victoria listened in from Alpine's glass-walled strategy room, earbud in, screen muted. Around her, the team moved like clockwork, efficient, present, already preparing for their half of the call. No one was sweating. No one was scrambling. This wasn't revenge show. This was war by numbers. Bryce kicked off Apex's presentation with his usual hollow charm, voice a bit too loud, tone trying too hard to sound relaxed. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We're pleased to share a strong, stable quarter, especially in light of market volatility. Strong, stable, right? Victoria flipped to her mirrored copy of Apex's deck. It was familiar. The models looked like hers, but thinned out, simplified, stripped of nuance. There were even leftover tags from her old framework, reworded just enough to hide her fingerprints, but not enough to make sense. Slide 6 showed top-line growth. Decent, but soft. No trajectory, no arc, just holding pattern. Came the Q&A1 LP, a heavy hitter out of Boston who had once emailed Victoria personally to thank her for explaining a risk exposure model in plain English, chimed in. Thanks, Bryce. Can you speak to the shift in Q3 projections? Looks like the forecasting logic has changed since last quarter. Is that based on a new framework? Bryce paused. Just for a second. But it was enough. Ah, yes. So, we've restructured some of the portfolio logic, he said, fumbling for the right language like it was hiding under the desk. Less aggressive projection modeling. We're focusing on steady returns rather than optimistic scaling. Translation: Victoria's models were gone, and they had nothing better to replace them. Another LP followed up. Is that a permanent methodology shift, or just temporary while the new team adjusts? Bryce made a noise, half chuckle, half wheeze. Well, not Victoria's, but we're holding steady, he said. Silence, then a few polite chuckles. The kind you hear at retirement parties for people no one liked. Victoria blinked. Did he really just say that? Across the room, Marcus arched an eyebrow. That your cue? He asked without looking up. She smiled faintly. Almost. The moderator cleared his throat. Thank you, Apex team. We'll now hear from Alpine Capital Partners for the remainder of the joint update. Victoria rose from her chair, slow and composed. Her laptop mirrored to the big screen as she clipped the mic to her collar. Someone passed her a bottle of water, but she didn't take it. Her hands were steady. She didn't need the hydration. She had the numbers, and numbers don't lie. Back on the call, LPs were waiting to see if Bryce's joke had legs, waiting to see what she would say. And she wasn't going to say much, because the numbers were going to speak for her. Tension filled the room like static, silent, electric coiled. She stood at the edge of the screen share window, watching her first slide load behind the moderator's transition. It was coming. Her name, her framework, her new title shining like a verdict across the Zoom grid. And Bryce, he was still on the call, still watching, still clutching that half-finished sentence like it could save him from the next slide. Now turning to our partner firm update, the moderator said, voice clipped and clean. A slight pause, then click. The slide flashed up. It was clinical, unapologetic, no fireworks, no fanfare. Just a sharp alpine blue banner, the logo of her new firm sitting confidently in the top right corner. Below it, Victoria Vale, Director, Strategic Portfolios, Alpine Capital Partners, $250 Q3 Q4 Outlook, simple. Exact. Like a signature carved into marble. Virtual call grid rippled. A few cameras blinked on, then off again. LPs adjusted in their chairs. Someone coughed. Bryce didn't move. Victoria didn't wait for a welcome. She just stepped in, smooth as silk. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'll be walking through Alpine's strategic outlook for the $250 million block allocated to Tier 2 and Tier 3 growth vehicles. We've restructured portfolio weighting using a predictive covariance model. Some of you may recognize it as the updated Vale framework. She let that hang. Not long, just long enough. Then, slide 2. The numbers hit like a tuning fork in a cathedral. Q3 forecast, plus 11.2% ROI, Q4 projection, plus 12.6% trajectory, capital efficiency, 9.3% above category baseline, compared to Apex's 5.4% and 6.1% projections. Wasn't a difference. It was a funeral, and the best part? She didn't have to mention them, not once. No names, no jabs, just forward metrics, clean lines, smooth logic. Each slide drove another nail buried in bar graphs, line curves, and velocity forecasts. There was no commentary, no comparison, no pettiness. Just facts. On slide 5, she referenced LP shared holdings, subtly highlighting cross-exposure segments. That's where most of the faces on the call started to tilt toward their screens. Phones began vibrating, not hers. She noticed Bryce's camera finally blinked on, and there he was. Still, pale, eyes fixed. His expression was so blank, it almost looked like someone had unplugged the thoughts from his skull. She watched, without blinking, as he slowly reached for his water bottle. The motion was robotic. His brain had nothing left to offer except the most primal coping reflex: hydrate and hope it's over soon. She continued, calm, focused. By slide 7, she'd outlined the pivot strategy for deploying capital into resilient micro-verticals across healthcare and green infra. Marcus sat off camera, watching her with that half-smile he only wore when things were going exactly to plan. Slide 8 detailed new stress-tested risk thresholds, something Victoria knew Apex had scrapped last year for overcomplicating the pitch. Here, they were core architecture, and the LPs knew it. When she reached the final slide, forward integration opportunities, she paused, not dramatically, just long enough to let the silence settle. Questions? There weren't any at first. Just the slow, inevitable return of breath into the virtual room. Then a voice. Boston LP again. Victoria be leading co-investment strategy for this block moving forward. Marcus's voice came in, steady and clear. She already is. Victoria nodded. One small, silent confirmation. That was it. No speeches, no smirks. Just a steady stare into the void Bryce had built for her, now filled with her numbers, her name, her future. Bryce's camera turned off again. But not before she saw it. The blink. That slow, heavy-lidded realization. Late to fix anything, too early to pretend it didn't happen. And that bottle of water, still untouched in his hand. The silence after her final slide wasn't awkward, it was sacred. that hushed, electric quiet that only happens when power changes hands, and no one wants to be the first to admit they felt it shift. Cameras stayed off. Microphones muted. Victoria let it stretch, let it breathe. Let the weight of every digit on those slides do the speaking for her, and came the voice. Same Boston LP as before, calm and clipped like he was ordering off a secret menu. Will Victoria be leading future co-investments? No hesitation, no looking around. Marcus's voice came in through the line like a gavel. She already is. And with that, the boardroom dam cracked. Ding, ding. Her inbox lit up like Times Square. Subject, follow-up. LP Capital Allocation Pathways Subject. Victoria, Exploratory Co-Investment Chat. Subject, looping in Apex for clarity on segmentation differences. Her old firm was CC'd on 2 of them. Explicitly. No blind copies, no back channels. Just blunt force investor curiosity, seeking clarity, yes, but not from Bryce. From her, somewhere in the background, she could hear Marcus stifling a laugh. He didn't need to say anything. He knew this wasn't just a job switch. It was a migration. Back on the call, Apex's end was dead silent. Bryce's camera stayed off. Not because of poor connection, not because of tech issues, because he had nothing left. No spin, no quip, no recovery arc where he somehow salvaged the narrative. Just a locked jaw, an empty stare, and a water bottle he still hadn't opened. Victoria didn't bother looking for his face again. She ended the call with a simple nod, clicked out of the Zoom tab, and closed her laptop with the finality of a judge's gavel. Then, silence. Not the tense kind, the earned kind. She leaned back in her chair, real leather this time, not the bargain bin mesh Apex had insisted promoted better posture, and let the stillness settle into her bones. She looked out the window of her new office, a floor higher than her old one, the skyline stretching out in every direction like a battlefield she'd already won. Her phone buzzed. One text. Marcus Levinson, nice delivery, pitch perfect. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she took a breath and looked back at the final investor email, now sitting in her inbox. A 6-line request. Direct. No fluff. Asking if she'd be willing to take over their emerging markets allocation discussion. It ended with, your insight has always been clearer than the noise. That was it. No trophies. No public applause. Just the quiet realignment of capital and attention, away from the men who dismissed her, toward the woman who never needed to raise her voice to burn the whole thing down. They told her to try elsewhere. She did, and took half the table with her. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.